Chapter 1. The Quiet Force That Moves the World. There is a kind of power that doesn't need volume to be heard. A presence that doesn't need applause to be recognized. It doesn't enter a room and demand the spotlight, it becomes the reason the room shifts. It doesn't chase validation, perform its confidence, or dress its strength in noise. No, it watches. It reads. It senses. It knows. And when it moves with such precision, such quiet authority, that everything around it instinctively adjusts. This is not the power you were taught to admire. It's not the power fed to you by movies, politics, or pop culture. The kind that shouts, postures, imposes, dominates. That's not power. That's theater. Real power doesn't entertain. It influences. It guides. It disrupts old patterns without needing to break anything. And it does it all without asking permission. We've been conditioned to believe that the loudest person in the room is the strongest, that dominance is leadership, that control is confidence. But history reveals a deeper truth. Think of Lincoln, calm under the weight of a fractured nation, his voice steady, measured, quiet, but every word anchored in resolve. Think of Gandhi, thin, soft-spoken, armed with nothing but principle and presence, yet able to shake the foundations of an empire. Think of Eleanor Roosevelt, never loud, never forceful, but revered by presidents and feared by systems because her intellect, her empathy, her stillness were weapons sharper than any rhetoric. Subtle power isn't passive. It's precise. It's patient. It doesn't rush to be seen. It trains itself to see. It doesn't crave to be understood. It studies. And that study becomes strategy. That strategy becomes movement. And that movement, when it comes, feels effortless, because it's been rehearsed in silence. You see, subtle power begins where noise ends. It begins in the mind of someone who no longer needs to win every argument to know they're right, who doesn't need to dominate every space to prove their worth, who doesn't need constant affirmation to act in alignment with their own internal code. That's why most people never touch this kind of influence. Because they're addicted to being perceived. But subtle power isn't built on perception. It's built on presence. And presence is not about charisma or charm, it's about clarity. A clarity so strong that you don't have to convince anyone of who you are. You are, and that is enough. You walk into a room, and your posture speaks before your mouth does. Your energy settles the chaos. Your silence disrupts the games. Your gaze ends the performance. Not because you're trying to be intimidating, but because your inner world is calibrated. That calibration becomes gravity. It draws respect. It attracts truth. It exposes falseness. Without ever raising your voice. Think of Ford, ruthlessly focused, not interested in flash, uninterested in praise. He didn't invent the automobile, he reinvented the system behind it. Quietly. Relentlessly. While others chased noise, he engineered impact. Carnegie, once a boy working 12-hour shifts in a Pittsburgh factory, didn't yell his way into greatness. He studied every corner of the steel business until he knew the game better than anyone playing it. Then he rewrote the rules. That is the essence of subtle power. The game is played before the game. It's in the observation, the restraint, the controlled silence, the ability to let others reveal themselves while you refine your own position. It's in the discipline of not reacting just because your emotions are loud. It's in the decision to hold your standard, even when the room lacks one. It's in the command of your body, your breath, your energy, because the ones who control the tempo of the entire room. Subtle power is not found in domination, it's found in alignment. Alignment between what you believe, how you think, what you say, and how you act. That's why it's so rare. Because most people are fragmented. Their minds say one thing, their mouths say another, and their energy leaks in 1,000 directions trying to be liked, accepted, praised. But when your mind, your word, and your presence agree, you don't have to chase influence. You become influence. But this isn't given. It's built. In silence. Through countless small decisions that seem invisible to the outside world. The decision to listen when you want to interrupt. To pause when your ego wants to react. To observe instead of control. To study people instead of trying to impress them. To choose restraint over righteousness. To learn the language of a room before you try to change it. That is the foundation. And from that foundation, something extraordinary happens. You begin to affect the space around you without effort. Because your awareness is so tuned, your presence so anchored, your language so precise, that the room unconsciously recalibrates to your frequency. This is why subtle power is never rushed. It doesn't panic. It doesn't force. It doesn't try to catch up with chaos. It moves with the confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are and what they're building, and refuses to trade that for temporary approval. It's not about being liked. It's about being undeniable. And the world feels it. People feel it. They won't always know why, but they'll sense that you operate differently, that you see things they don't, that your reactions are calculated, that your silence means something, that your stillness has a center, and from that center, you become unshakable. Not because you never feel fear, but because your identity is rooted in something deeper than emotion. That depth creates space. Space between stimulus and response. Space to choose. And in that space, you stop being reactive and start becoming dangerously effective. Because now, your actions aren't random. They're strategic. They're chosen. And when you do speak, when you do act, it cuts through the noise like a knife through fog. Not because you raised your volume, but because you raised your frequency. This is not theory. This is the lived reality of every person who has ever shifted culture, systems, or history without losing themselves to performance. From Mandela's decades in silence before he spoke to the world, to Tesla's obsession with vision over spectacle, to the unnamed leaders in families, communities, and companies who move entire rooms with the weight of their word, not because they talk much, but because when they do, they've earned the right to be heard. So if you want to become powerful, truly powerful, don't study how to be louder. Study how to be sharper. Calibrate your thinking. Clean your energy. Align your actions. Let your silence become a mirror. Let your presence speak before your voice does. Stop trying to dominate people and start mastering yourself. Because the most powerful person in the room is never the one proving it. It's the one who doesn't have to. Chapter 2. Mindset is architecture. Before presence becomes a language, before energy becomes felt, before influence begins to shape a room or a relationship, before a single word is spoken or withheld, there is a layer beneath everything that determines what version of you shows up. It is the mindset. But not the surface-level mindset people talk about when they say, stay positive, be confident, or believe in yourself. That's fluff. The mindset that creates subtle power is not motivational. It is structural. It is the unseen blueprint beneath your reactions, your pauses, your choices, and your silence. You can't fake this. You can't decorate it with affirmations. You build it. With attention. With discipline. With repetition. With self-honesty so sharp it can cut through your own illusions. You see, your mindset is not what you think. It's what you default to under pressure. That's when it shows itself. Not in ideal conditions, not in quiet meditation, not in curated conversations. But in the moment someone challenges you, dismisses you, tries to control the room with force, or walks in radiating chaos. In that moment, your mindset is the voice in your head that says, react, perform, collapse, fight back, explain yourself, prove your worth. Or it's the voice that says, wait, breathe. You are already enough. That voice isn't random. It's not mystical. It's programmed. And you are the programmer, whether you've been intentional about it or not. So ask yourself, what do you default to when you're under pressure? When someone disagrees with you publicly? When someone interrupts you mid-sentence? When your boundaries are tested? When silence stretches and you don't know what the other person is thinking? Because that's where your true mindset lives. Not in your statements of confidence, but in your internal stability when everything outside of you is uncertain. And the truth is, most people build their mindset around survival, not power. They inherit beliefs shaped by fear, control, abandonment, rejection. They learn early that approval is safety, so they chase validation. They learn that silence can mean danger, so they over-explain. They learn that stillness can be punished, so they rush to fill space. All of that becomes the architecture of the mind. And unless it's rewritten, unless it's challenged and recoded, those old survival patterns keep running the show, even when you wear success on the outside. But subtle power begins with an inner architecture that is deliberately redesigned. You train your nervous system to remain still when it wants to flee. You train your perception to separate noise from truth. You train your thoughts to track patterns instead of reacting to behavior. You train your sense of identity so precisely that no environment, no opinion, no emotional climate can disorient you. That training creates presence. And that presence becomes influence. Not by force, but by frequency. Because people feel when your mindset is clean. They feel when your confidence isn't performed but installed. Look at people who carry weight when they speak. Not just celebrities or leaders, but the rare individuals in everyday life whose energy silences a room. Watch them. They move slow. They don't explain everything. They don't chase reactions. They don't flinch when there's tension. But because their mindset is not hijacked by insecurity. They've already resolved the questions that most people carry into every room. Am I enough? Am I seen? Am I safe? They've answered those questions internally, so they don't need to resolve them externally. And that, more than any trick, tactic, or technique, is what makes them powerful. The reason most people fail to become truly influential is because their mindset is still wired to need external confirmation. They're waiting for proof before they believe. They want to be agreed with before they trust their own vision. But subtle power flips that. It's not about waiting for the room to validate your value. It's about bringing such clean self-recognition into the room that it reorganizes the space without needing to demand it. This is why mindset must be engineered. Like steel. Like architecture. You build it not by thinking positively, but by exposing your assumptions, challenging your defaults, and repeatedly choosing alignment over approval. You build it by asking yourself, daily, am I thinking like someone who reacts, or someone who recalibrates? Am I thinking like someone who needs to be seen, or someone who already knows who they are? Am I thinking like someone trying to be liked, or someone who intends to be respected because they've earned it with integrity, stillness, and precision? The mind trained for subtle power doesn't just observe behavior, it observes energy. It's not caught up in words, it's listening to what's unspoken. It's watching micro-reactions, tracking dynamics, sensing timing. It doesn't get hooked by emotion, it gets curious. It doesn't chase agreement, it studies resistance. And from that place of non-reactive attention, it can choose with intention rather than react from old programming. And when your mindset gets to that level, when it stops collapsing under the need to be affirmed, you stop leaking power. You stop handing your emotional weather over to other people's moods. You stop negotiating your values for comfort. You stop trying to win moments. Because you're building momentum instead. And that momentum is not loud. It's not hyped. It's not desperate. It's the kind of slow, steady mental posture that says, I do not need to announce what I'm building. You will feel it when it arrives. It's the kind of mindset that doesn't chase opportunity, but becomes the kind of person opportunity finds. It's the kind of mindset that doesn't collapse when the plan changes, but adapts without losing purpose. That kind of mindset doesn't happen overnight. But every moment is an opportunity to build it. Every time you resist the urge to prove yourself. Every time you choose stillness over emotional retaliation. Every time you delay gratification to preserve alignment. Every time you remain calm when provoked. Every time you listen when you could speak. These are the bricks. This is the architecture. And the person you're becoming is built in those choices, not in what you say you believe, but in what you do when it's hard to believe it. Because influence isn't just about what you know. It's about what you've trained yourself to do when the old version of you wants to take control. And once your mindset stops being the loudest voice in the room and starts being the most accurate one, you won't need to speak to influence. You'll just need to arrive. Chapter 3. The Code of Belief. If mindset is the architecture of your inner world, then belief is the foundation, hidden, deep, often invisible to the conscious mind, but responsible for every thought you repeat, every action you take, every word you don't say, every room you shrink in, every boundary you ignore, every confrontation you avoid. Belief is not what you post on your wall. It's not what you say you stand for. It's not the quote you write under a picture to sound evolved. Your true beliefs are revealed by your reactions. They are coded in your behavior, etched into your tone, embedded in the micro-decisions you make when no one is watching and nothing is rehearsed. You can say you believe you deserve respect, but if your body tenses every time someone questions you, if your tone becomes apologetic every time you speak in a room of power, if you avoid being seen because part of you still believes that visibility equals danger, then what you say you believe is irrelevant. You live from the belief system that runs the deepest, not the one that sounds the best. And that's why most people never access real power, not because they lack talent, intellect, potential, or even desire, but because their belief system was forged in environments that rewarded invisibility. Somewhere along the line, they learned that being small is safe, that being silent avoids conflict, that being agreeable earns love. And they built entire personalities around these protective beliefs. Then they wonder why they can't command a room, why they feel invisible, why their energy doesn't land, why their presence doesn't move people. It's not a performance issue. It's not about learning how to present better. It's not about posture tricks and vocal tone. It's a belief issue. Because no amount of polish can hide the internal fractures created by beliefs that say, "I'm not safe if I'm fully seen." That's where belief begins to either amplify or sabotage subtle power. Because belief is the signal that precedes your presence. It's what people feel before you speak. You can be saying the right words, wearing the right clothes, mimicking the body language of confidence, but if you don't believe what you represent, if your subconscious belief system is still rooted in avoidance, fear, and self-doubt, then everything you do becomes a performance, not a transmission. And people feel that. They may not know why, but they sense the hesitation in your energy, the misalignment in your tone, the micro-wavering in your decisions, and they adjust their respect accordingly. Belief is not about hype or hope. It's about what you've rehearsed in silence. It's about what you've dared to rewire after years of operating on inherited fear. And that rewiring is not pretty. It's not motivational. It's surgical. It's the quiet process of identifying every belief that kept you safe in old environments and realizing those same beliefs are now limiting you in the ones you've grown into. It's realizing that what protected you as a child is now holding you back as an adult. It's looking at every lie that was wrapped in love, stay humble, don't be too much, don't draw attention, and realizing those were not truths. They were rules. Rules written by people who never got to see what power looks like when it's aligned, when it's clean, when it's silent but absolute. You see, the reason belief matters in the context of subtle power is because belief doesn't shout. It radiates. It doesn't need to argue. It anchors. It doesn't need to dominate. It holds. When you believe, deeply, systemically, without internal conflict, that you are worthy, that your perception matters, that your silence is not absence but strategy, then you no longer operate with performance energy. You operate with presence energy. And presence energy doesn't chase impact. It is impact. And this is what most people miss in the world of influence. You cannot fake belief. You can fake charisma. You can fake certainty. You can even fake vulnerability. But belief is felt on a primal level. It's encoded in your nervous system. And if it's not there, if you don't really believe in your value, in your ability to navigate complexity, in your right to take up space, then your entire presence becomes conditional. You'll show up fully only when the room feels safe. You'll speak only when you're sure of approval. You'll lead only when there's no risk of failure. That's not power. That's dependency. So the question becomes, what do you believe? Not what do you want to believe? Not what sounds good. What do you actually believe about your role in a room? About your ability to read people? About your capacity to remain composed when challenged? About your right to be heard without having to first entertain? Because until you confront the outdated beliefs sitting under your behavior, every attempt at power will be sabotaged by the parts of you still terrified to own it. And belief is rewritten through exposure and repetition. You expose the old narrative. You interrupt it. You refuse to react the way the past version of you would. You breathe through the discomfort. You hold your center in situations that once triggered collapse. And you do it again and again until your nervous system learns a new truth. I can be calm and still be safe. I can be visible and still be respected. I can lead without needing to dominate. That's not positive thinking. That's reconditioning. That's how belief becomes embodied, not just imagined. And once belief is embodied, everything changes. You don't have to try to command respect, it arrives with you. You don't have to prove your value, it's felt in your pace, your presence, your posture. You don't have to dominate people to gain influence, your alignment becomes your leverage. Because when belief is clean, your presence does more than take up space. It transforms it. Chapter 4. The Sharpness of Clarity. Clarity is not a feeling. It's not a fleeting moment of inspiration or a momentary sense of direction. Clarity is a decision. It is the disciplined, unflinching resolve to remove the fog, not just around you, but within you. It's what cuts through the noise of emotion, distraction, fear, and ego. It's not something you wait for. It's something you build, piece by piece, day by day, through the refusal to live in confusion you've normalized simply because it feels familiar. Without clarity, there is no subtle power, because subtle power depends entirely on your ability to see through surface, through performance, through noise, and into the center of what matters. Without that ability, your presence weakens. Your perception dulls. Your energy disperses. Because if your internal compass is scrambled, your influence becomes chaotic, fragmented, and ungrounded. You can't direct a room if you can't even direct your own focus. You can't read people if you've never taken the time to read yourself. And you definitely can't be a source of gravity in unstable environments if your mind is bouncing between 1,000 unexamined questions. This is where people get lost. They chase influence while ignoring the root of where power begins. Not in charisma, not in tactics, but in clarity. Clarity about who you are. About what you're building. About what you will and won't tolerate. About the kind of presence you choose to carry, even in rooms that don't yet recognize it. Because clarity does something very few people understand. It eliminates hesitation. When you know who you are, what you value, what you're building, and why you're in the room, you don't waste time posturing. You don't bend your energy to match the mood of people who haven't done the same work. You don't seek validation from environments you're meant to influence. You move with intent. You speak only when it matters. You hold silence when it's strategic. You don't fall into reaction, because you're not scanning for safety, you already carry it. And to carry clarity like that, you must be willing to remove the things that cloud it. You must be willing to detox from distraction, mental, digital, emotional. You must be willing to eliminate the people who confuse your peace. You must be willing to outgrow the beliefs that once gave you comfort but now keep you small. Clarity comes at a cost. You cannot stay loyal to your confusion and expect your presence to carry force. You cannot entertain noise and expect your silence to command respect. You cannot keep saying yes to everything and expect your time to reflect your priorities. The great ones, those who don't need to speak loudly because their energy already speaks, are always clear. Clear on their vision, clear on their values, clear on their role in the room. They don't need to dominate conversation because their clarity is doing the talking. People follow them not because they are impressive, but because they are precise. Their yes is clean. Their no is final. Their time is protected. Their communication is surgical. Not rushed. Not bloated. Not apologetic. Because clarity creates efficiency. It sharpens your attention. It filters out the noise. It makes you a weapon, not a wandering thought process trying to impress. This is why unclear people often come across as anxious, desperate, or unstable, because deep down, they are. Not because they're weak, but because they haven't made the internal decision to see things as they are. They're still trying to fit into dynamics that don't fit them. They're still looking for answers outside themselves. They're still adjusting their frequency to match the expectations of people who don't even know what they value. And so, they speak too much, they explain too often, they wait too long. And in that delay, in that scattered energy, their influence slips away before it even begins. Clarity is not rigid, it's adaptive. But adaptive with intent. It doesn't shift based on approval, it adjusts based on data. It's not confused by emotion, but it listens to it. It doesn't fear discomfort, it uses it. Clarity is not control. It's command. The difference is profound. Control tries to manipulate what's outside to create safety inside. Command begins with safety within, and from that grounded space, moves the outside world with precision and authority. Think of anyone who's ever moved the needle in culture, in leadership, in transformation. Think of people like Steve Jobs, brutally clear on what he wanted, how it should feel, how it should work. He didn't ask for permission to dream that clearly. He demanded clarity and gave birth to a vision that no committee could have created. Think of Martin Luther King Jr. His clarity wasn't in the politics, it was in the moral direction. That's why his words moved people. Not because they were loud, but because they were clear. Undeniably clear. And when you become clear, you become dangerous. Not because you intend to harm, but because you can no longer be manipulated. You can no longer be swayed by every emotional current. You can no longer be seduced by meaningless attention or approval. You become focused. And focus, real focus, is rare. It's magnetic. Because in a world of people who have no idea what they're really about, your decisiveness becomes a signal of safety, of leadership, of presence. You stop following the emotional tone of the room. You set it. So if you want your presence to matter, stop chasing performance. Start cultivating clarity. Clarity in your habits, clarity in your energy, clarity in your thoughts, clarity in your mission. Clean your space. Cut the noise. Question the automatic. Ask yourself hard questions and don't stop until your answers no longer shift with circumstance. Because once your internal world becomes uncluttered, your external influence becomes undeniable. And from that place, clarity is not a tactic. It becomes a force. Chapter 5. The Geometry of Vision. Vision is not a dream. It's not an Instagram-worthy quote, not a mood board taped to a wall, not a feel-good fantasy you return to when the world feels heavy. Real vision, the kind that births legacy, the kind that rearranges rooms before you speak, the kind that fuels a presence so strong people can feel it before they understand it, is not about later. Vision is now. It's what you carry into every interaction. It's the lens you see through when everyone else is stuck in the fog of the immediate. It's not what you want. It's what you know is coming, so clearly, so confidently, that you move like it's already here. Because vision is not about sight. It's about perception. And perception isn't passive, it's strategic. It's the ability to hold an outcome in your mind so vividly, so relentlessly, that it begins to bend your behavior toward it without needing motivation. It shapes your tone. It refines your schedule. It filters your reactions. It determines who gets access to your time. That's why people without vision are so easy to distract, because they don't know what they're anchoring to. They drift. They react. They get seduced by comfort and hijacked by every opinion that feels urgent. But people with vision, real vision, they move differently. They respond with precision. They know the difference between momentum and movement. They speak only when their words build toward what they see. You can feel it when someone has a vision. Not because they shout about it, but because they've embodied it. Their discipline is tighter. Their boundaries are non-negotiable. Their time is guarded not with apology, but with clarity. And their silence is not uncertainty. It's the quiet confidence of someone already aligned with the future they're building. They don't need applause now because they're not building for now. They don't need to win the moment because they're designing something so much bigger than the moment. And that's what makes their presence so powerful, because it's connected to something invisible but undeniable. Look at Walt Disney, a man who imagined entire worlds decades before the infrastructure existed to make them real. He didn't just build theme parks. He bent reality toward a vision so immersive, so obsessive, that entire industries had to evolve to keep up with what he was already seeing. He wasn't loud. He wasn't erratic. He wasn't interested in short-term validation. He was committed to the long arc, and every decision he made was calibrated through that vision. That's the difference between a visionary and a dreamer. A dreamer needs inspiration. A visionary executes through chaos. Vision is subtle power's secret weapon, because when you carry vision, you don't need to dominate people. You just outlast them. You don't need to shout your goals. You design systems that make them inevitable. You don't need to impress people who can't see what you see, you simply stop inviting them into rooms they're not built to enter. Vision makes your silence meaningful. It gives your pauses weight. Because behind every still moment, there's motion happening beneath, strategy, alignment, movement on levels most people can't detect because they're only tracking what's loud. But here's what matters most: vision is not just about scale. It's not always about a billion-dollar business, a movement, a monument. It can be quiet, private, personal. The vision to raise a family that breaks every generational curse. The vision to build a relationship where communication is clean and presence is sacred. The vision to live a life of such emotional clarity that no lie can survive in your space. Whatever it is, vision is what gives your subtle power structure. Without it, you drift. You adapt to chaos. You respond to life instead of shaping it. But with it, every word you speak, or choose not to speak, becomes part of a blueprint. And blueprints, when respected, become realities. You know why most people don't carry this level of presence? Because they've never taken the time to get that clear. They confuse noise with momentum. They confuse desire with design. They confuse intensity with direction. So they burn out. Or worse, they succeed in things they never actually wanted because their vision wasn't truly theirs, it was inherited, borrowed, or manufactured by external noise. But true vision cannot be downloaded from a trend. It has to be excavated, dug out of your experiences, refined through your values, clarified in silence. And once you find it, everything changes. Because now your yes means something. Your no means more. Your time has boundaries. Your relationships have standards. And your presence begins to radiate intention in ways words never could. Vision is what makes a soft-spoken person undeniable. It's what makes a quiet leader unforgettable. It's what makes the disciplined feel magnetic. Because when you see someone moving with that level of unseen clarity, you don't need to know the details. You just trust them. You respect them. Not because they sold you something, but because their consistency speaks louder than any pitch ever could. So if you want to become influential without saying a word, you must start by getting ruthlessly clear on what you see. What are you actually building? What version of yourself are you designing? What do you want your presence to do when it walks into a room? What do you want your silence to signal? Because your influence will never rise above the clarity of your vision. And people can't follow someone who doesn't know where they're going. They'll watch you, sure. They might be entertained. But they won't adjust to you unless they feel your trajectory is anchored. And here's the final truth: vision isn't passive. It's not something you wait for. It's something you declare internally, then build toward relentlessly. Even on the days you doubt it. Especially on the days no one else sees it. Because that's when subtle power is forged, not when the world is cheering, but when you move anyway. Quietly. Consistently. With no external fire but the one you've lit inside yourself. That's not hype. That's alignment. That's how invisible presence becomes real-world impact. Chapter 6: The Gravity of Purpose. Purpose is not a tagline. It's not a brand slogan, a social media bio, or a pretty phrase you recite when someone asks you what drives you. Purpose, real purpose, is an anchor. It is the internal force that stabilizes your presence when everything outside you is unstable. It is not hype. It is not performance. It is a weight you carry within your chest that holds you in position when pressure tempts you to fold, when chaos invites you to react, when comfort seduces you to settle. Purpose is the quiet, unshakable center that whispers, "You were not built to disappear just because this moment feels hard." Without purpose, power becomes reactive. Influence becomes performance. Presence becomes fragile. You might appear strong for a while. You might impress people. You might even win their attention. But the moment pressure enters the room, the moment resistance tightens its grip, the moment no one claps for your silence or understands your restraint, you'll either bend or break. Because without purpose, all presence is borrowed. It's not embodied. It's a costume. And costumes always collapse under the weight of real life. You can study all the psychology you want. You can master body language. You can read every book on persuasion. But if you don't know why you're here, if you haven't forged a relationship with your own why, independent of applause or recognition, then nothing you build will last. Because purpose isn't what gives you energy when you're inspired. Purpose is what keeps you aligned when you're exhausted, unseen, unvalidated, and no one around you gets it. Purpose is what keeps you silent when you want to scream. Purpose is what gets you out of bed when no one's watching. Purpose is what steadies your energy when fear wants to hijack your body. Purpose is what allows you to walk into a room and not need to be liked, because you're not performing for temporary comfort, you're building for something eternal. Think of the giants who shaped the world not by yelling over it, but by standing inside their purpose so fully that the world had no choice but to adjust. Think of Frederick Douglass, born into slavery, raised in systems designed to silence him forever. He didn't just escape. He educated. He elevated. He entered rooms where he wasn't supposed to exist and altered the emotional climate with the weight of his clarity. That was not charisma. That was purpose. Think of Rosa Parks, who sat still so generations could stand. That wasn't a loud act. It was a clear one. That's what purpose does. It brings gravity to the moment. It slows down chaos. It forces systems to confront their own momentum. And it does all of that without ever needing to raise its voice. When you carry purpose, your silence is no longer passive. It's intentional. Your stillness is no longer hesitation. It's restraint. Your decisions are no longer reactions. They are extensions of your internal code. Because you're not just living for this hour or this day or this season. You're building something that transcends the trend, the mood, the moment. And in a world obsessed with urgency, that kind of groundedness is magnetic. But you don't find purpose through thought alone. You find it in conflict, in contrast, in tension, in the moments you almost forgot yourself, in the relationships that tested your boundaries, in the jobs that drained your soul, in the decisions you regret, in the betrayals you never saw coming. That's where purpose begins to crystallize, not in clarity, but in contrast. Not in comfort, but in the repeated decision to ask, what am I here to do? And what pain am I willing to face to become the kind of person who can hold that answer without flinching? Because the truth is, your purpose is not something you find. It's something you remember. It was always there, buried beneath layers of noise, distraction, survival, and inherited rules. It's not new. It's ancient. It's been whispering to you every time you've said, "This isn't me." Every time your body tightened in a room you were pretending to belong in. Every time you said yes to stay safe, but something inside you broke. Every time you watched someone fold when you knew they were capable of more. And it hurt, not because they disappointed you, but because it reminded you of a version of yourself that used to do the same. That's purpose knocking. And when you finally let it speak, when you stop silencing it with distraction and start listening to what your inner world has been trying to tell you for years, everything begins to shift. You stop looking for clarity in other people's opinions. You stop outsourcing direction to your emotions. You stop reacting to every challenge as if it's a threat. Instead, you observe. You recenter. You move. Not because you're sure of every step, but because you're clear on the direction. And direction, when it comes from purpose, is more powerful than certainty ever will be. Purpose doesn't need speed. It needs alignment. It doesn't need perfection. It needs devotion. It doesn't need everyone to understand. It needs you to understand. Because once you do, you'll stop explaining. You'll stop performing. You'll stop dimming your light just to make insecure people feel comfortable. You'll stop spending energy trying to be acceptable. You'll start becoming undeniable. Quietly. Precisely. Without needing to announce anything. Because here's the truth. A person rooted in purpose does not walk into a room and wonder, do they like me? They walk in with the question, can I serve here? Can I elevate here? Can I remain aligned in this space without bending my principles? And if the answer is no, they leave. Not with drama. Not with rage. But with clarity. Because when your life is rooted in purpose, you understand that not every room deserves your energy, and your absence can be just as powerful as your presence. This is the art of subtle power. Not controlling the world around you, but becoming so aligned with your inner world that the external either rises to meet you or it quietly falls away. And you, anchored in purpose, don't chase either. You simply continue building. Because your purpose is not up for negotiation. Chapter 7. The Structure of Discipline. Discipline is not about restriction, it's about expansion. It's not about punishing yourself into action or grinding through life with a clenched jaw and a rigid spine. True discipline is about building the internal infrastructure that allows your highest potential to function on demand, not just when you feel like it, not just when inspiration is convenient, not just when the audience is clapping, but especially when no one's watching, when no one's validating, when the path is hard, lonely, and quiet. It's the daily architecture that protects your energy, that sharpens your attention, that keeps your presence crisp and clean when the world is trying to pull you into chaos. Discipline is what makes subtle power sustainable. Because without it, even the strongest sense of purpose collapses under fatigue. Even the clearest vision drifts into abstraction. Even the sharpest mindset gets dull in the face of emotional noise. You can have all the belief in the world. But if your actions aren't aligned consistently with that belief, you become a person who knows what they want but never becomes it. You become a theorist of your own potential. And theory doesn't command respect, execution does. Execution built on rhythm. Execution built on repetition. Execution built on a system that protects you from the most dangerous force in your life, your lesser self. Because the truth is, you don't rise to the level of your ambition, you fall to the level of your systems. And if you haven't built those systems with precision, then pressure will expose you, emotion will derail you, and convenience will decide your fate. That's what most people miss. They think power is intensity, that it comes from how fired up you are, how hard you push, how loud you get. But real power doesn't need to push, it pulls from structure. It doesn't force its way through resistance. It moves through it with quiet consistency. Look at the great builders of history, the Carnegies, the Edisons, the Lincolns. Their impact didn't come from chaos. It came from rhythm. Edison didn't stumble into 1,000 failed prototypes by chance. He worked by structure. His failure was methodical. His persistence wasn't emotional, it was embedded in routine. Carnegie didn't dominate steel by being a motivational figure. He did it by building layered, exacting systems of management and communication that outperformed louder competitors. Lincoln, in the quietest moments of internal war, returned to process, to study, to writing, to stillness, not to avoid action, but to ensure that action, when taken, meant something. Discipline is the internal agreement between who you are and who you're becoming. It is the mechanism by which you keep your word to yourself. And if you want influence that doesn't leak, if you want presence that doesn't burn out, you need to develop a relationship with discipline that isn't adversarial. It isn't about force. It's about respect. You respect your future self enough to protect them from your current temptations. You respect your vision enough to create rituals that make collapse unlikely. You respect your energy enough to stop negotiating with your lower impulses. Because when you remove discipline from power, what you get is volatility. People who show up strong one day and disappear the next. People whose presence is performative, whose stillness is accidental, whose silence is uncertain. That's not subtle power, that's mood-based energy. That's someone whose presence can't be trusted because it's not rooted in structure. Discipline is what gives your silence meaning. Because silence, when it comes from avoidance, is weakness. But silence, when it comes from structure, is strategy. It's the pause before a precise strike. It's the breath before an intentional move. It's the space where clarity, emotion, and timing are recalibrated. But none of that is possible if your discipline only exists when life is easy. You need the kind of discipline that works even when your mood doesn't. Especially when your mood doesn't. Because that's when most people disappear. That's when they default to noise, to reaction, to chaos. But you stay grounded. You stay aligned. You stay dangerous, not because you're emotional, but because you're disciplined. Discipline trains your body to obey your values. It teaches your voice when to speak and when to hold. It makes your presence reliable, not erratic. It's the hidden mechanism behind consistency, and consistency is the currency of trust. Without discipline, your presence becomes a gamble. With it, you become a signal, a force, something people can measure themselves against, something people can sense before you say a word. Not because you're loud, but because you're consistent. And that consistency, day after day, when no one sees you, when no one claps for your restraint, when no one congratulates your focus, that's what makes your silence sharp. That's what makes your stillness unsettling. Because discipline builds weight. It builds mass. Not just physical, but energetic. You walk into a room, and the discipline you've kept begins to speak. Your posture is different. Your pace is different. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't scramble for attention. You own your space. Not through force, but through internal sovereignty. So if you want to master subtle power, you need to stop thinking about discipline as sacrifice and start thinking about it as architecture. Every decision you make today, the food, the conversations, the distractions you allow or deny, they're not just habits. They're bricks. You're building a structure that will either protect your energy or expose your weakness. Choose wisely. Because once you commit to structure, once your daily rituals begin to reflect the person you say you are, once your actions become a sermon louder than your voice, then you no longer need to ask for respect. You'll walk into a room, and the room will recognize you. Not because of what you said, but because of what you've built. Chapter 8, Action as Identity. Action is not the end result of thought. It's the confirmation of belief. It's what makes the invisible real. It's the physical evidence of your internal structure. And that's why most people never gain traction, not because they lack potential, but because their actions contradict their values. They speak about purpose, but their schedule reflects avoidance. They talk about clarity, but their daily execution is scattered. They dream of impact, but they only move when it's convenient or visible or comfortable. And so, their power never crystallizes. Their presence never deepens. Their influence never lands. Because action is not just motion, it's alignment in motion. And if your movement isn't aligned, it's not progress, it's just noise. The people who carry real presence, the ones who command attention without seeking it, they move differently. Not just mentally, not just emotionally, but physically. You can see it in the way they sit, stand, speak, respond, listen, withdraw. Every gesture is deliberate. Every decision is anchored. They are not performing productivity. They are executing precision. Their action isn't fast, it's clear. It doesn't look busy, it looks inevitable. And that inevitability is what gives their influence weight, because everyone around them can feel it. This person is not guessing. They are building. But to build like that, you need to unlearn everything you were taught about action. You need to stop confusing speed with effectiveness. You need to stop mistaking multitasking for mastery. You need to stop equating being tired with being productive. Because action, real action, is not about how much you do. It's about what you do when it matters most, and how little you let the noise of the world derail that process. It's not about volume. It's about signal. A single, well-timed decision can shift more than 100 rushed ones. A single act rooted in alignment can rewire your entire future. A single boundary enforced without apology can restore your energy for weeks. But you only get to make those kinds of moves when your actions are chosen, not reactive, not emotional, not impulsive, but calibrated. Because subtle power doesn't explode. It doesn't crash into rooms. It doesn't race to prove. It moves in silence, but it moves. And that movement, though quiet, is surgical. It's the kind of action that doesn't need to be explained, because its results speak louder than anything you could say. It's the email you don't send because it's beneath your energy. It's the deal you walk away from because your values aren't for sale. It's the room you exit without theatrics because you know your absence will do more than your presence ever could. That is action. That is power. That is the invisible engine behind real presence. But here's the truth. Action without alignment is just glorified distraction. You can fill your calendar. You can impress people with how much you're doing. You can wear exhaustion like a badge. But none of that will build authority if you're just reacting to life instead of designing it. Every time you say yes to what doesn't matter, you rob your future of clarity. Every time you delay what you know you must face, you fracture your identity. Every time you shrink instead of execute, you teach your nervous system that fear makes the decisions, not you. And that's why action is not optional. It's not something you do when you feel ready. It's the practice of showing your body, your mind, your environment, this is who I am. Not who I say I want to be. Who I am in action. Every small decision becomes a vote for the future you're building. Every boundary you enforce becomes a reminder to yourself, I am not available for anything that shrinks me. Every hour you protect, every detail you finish, every excuse you override, it all compounds. Not into perfection, but into presence. And presence built on action is presence that lasts. Because no one can take it from you. They can't steal your work ethic. They can't deny your consistency. They can't unsee what your decisions have already produced. And that's what separates the powerful from the performative. One waits to be seen. The other moves until they are undeniable. You want influence? Act like it. Quietly. Ruthlessly. Without asking for applause. You want to lead? Build the discipline to show up exactly the same whether you're being watched or not. You want to be respected? Make choices that respect your future. Because action is identity. You don't become powerful by thinking about it. You become powerful by moving like someone who already is. And that movement doesn't have to be fast. It doesn't have to be dramatic. But it must be true. It must be yours. It must come from the cleanest part of you, the part that isn't chasing, that isn't proving, that isn't addicted to validation. It must come from the part of you that remembers who you were before the world told you to be smaller. And from that place, from that still, steady core, you build. One step at a time. One decision at a time. One recalibration at a time. Because real power is not loud. It is lived. Chapter 9. Gratitude as power, not performance. Gratitude is not weakness. It's not passivity. It's not some shallow practice of saying thank you in hopes the universe will return the favor. It's not about pretending everything is fine or denying hardship in the name of positivity. Real gratitude, the kind that sharpens you, the kind that humbles you without shrinking you, the kind that expands your influence without needing to say a word, is a discipline of perception. It's the ability to choose what matters most, even when everything around you is designed to distract, irritate, overwhelm, or numb you. It's not a trick to feel better. It's a tool to stay sharp. Because in a world that constantly whispers not enough, not fast enough, not good enough, not seen enough, gratitude is a defiance. It is the conscious act of reclaiming your center from the endless pull of comparison, from the addictive highs of external validation, from the internal voice that says, you'll be powerful when, no. You're powerful now. Right now. And gratitude doesn't diminish your ambition, it grounds it. It clarifies it. It makes sure that you're building from a place of wholeness, not desperation. From alignment, not lack. From vision, not fear. People mistake gratitude for softness. They think it makes you passive. But in the hands of the disciplined, gratitude is a weapon. It allows you to operate at high levels of intensity without poisoning your system with bitterness. It allows you to face adversity without collapsing into victimhood. It allows you to hold your boundaries without becoming emotionally rigid. Because when you're truly grateful, not performatively, but viscerally, you stop making your emotional state the responsibility of everyone around you. You stop reacting to every disappointment like it's personal sabotage. You stop needing every room to validate your presence. Because you're already full. Not in a fake, inflated way, but in a calm, calibrated way. And that fullness makes your energy heavy, in the best way possible. People feel it. They don't know what it is, but they feel that you're not grasping, that you're not chasing, that you're not waiting for their reaction to feel okay inside your skin. And that subtle but undeniable shift in energetic posture is what makes people trust you, follow you, listen to you, even when you're silent. Because gratitude makes you anchored. And anchored people are rare. Everyone is floating. Everyone is searching. Everyone is reacting. But when you've trained yourself to see what's already present, not what's missing, not what's owed, but what's true, you start moving from a place of sufficiency. And from sufficiency, your presence becomes unshakable. It doesn't mean you settle. It means you're strategic. It means you don't panic in silence. It means you don't need to manipulate outcomes to feel safe. It means you can lead a conversation without controlling it, because you're not trying to extract something from it. You're simply showing up, clean, aware, aligned, and letting the strength of your internal center guide the external dynamics. That's what makes subtle power so different from theatrical dominance. One depends on the environment to cooperate. The other creates the environment by how it enters. Gratitude makes you efficient. Because when you're not mentally looping on what's missing, what went wrong, or what you wish had happened, your mind becomes available. You stop leaking energy into stories that weaken your signal. You stop fantasizing about alternate realities and instead engage fully with what is. And that engagement, when sharpened by gratitude, makes your awareness deadly accurate. You start noticing what others miss. You start listening between the lines. You start reading rooms not from ego, but from presence. Because you're not busy reacting to your own internal chaos. You're available to perceive. And when your perception improves, your execution sharpens. Because you can't take clean action from a polluted mindset. But gratitude cleans it. Quietly. Repeatedly. Without applause. And over time, that clarity compounds into momentum. Not the loud kind. Not the ego-driven kind. The quiet kind that builds legacies. That builds reputations. That builds lives you don't need to escape from. This is the real reason gratitude is foundational to subtle power. It makes you durable. Not temporarily inspired. Not high off a win. Not optimistic only when things are going your way. Durable. Meaning you can lead in storms. You can think under fire. You can observe instead of react. You can hold your boundaries without needing to defend them. Because you're not trying to prove your worth. You're already connected to it. And when you're already connected to it, you don't need the world to agree before you act. Think of the greats. Think of Nelson Mandela. 27 years in a prison cell, and he came out more composed than most men who've never been challenged. That wasn't weakness. That was spiritual strength. That was gratitude weaponized into focus. Think of Viktor Frankl, survivor of the Holocaust, author of Man's Search for Meaning. He found purpose in suffering. Not because suffering is holy, but because perspective is sovereign. And the moment you stop letting your environment define your energy, you become the kind of person who radiates power without opening your mouth. Because power, at its highest form, is gratitude without dependency. It is the deep understanding that while you may not control all outcomes, you absolutely control the meaning you assign to them, and that meaning becomes the lens through which your presence either expands or contracts. And gratitude keeps it expanding. Quietly. Consistently. Without the drama of needing to be seen, because you're already rooted in something deeper than perception. That's not cliché. That's strategy. That's survival. That's subtle power. Chapter 10. Adaptability as Silent Authority. Adaptability is not about being agreeable. It's not about becoming what people want just to survive the moment. It's not about shape-shifting to avoid conflict or softening your truth so it fits the mood. That's appeasement, not adaptability. That's dilution, not evolution. Real adaptability is the skill of adjusting your strategy without ever compromising your identity. It's the ability to shift gears without losing direction. It's the strength to absorb pressure, change conditions, and recalibrate in real time, all without becoming emotionally destabilized, spiritually fractured, or energetically chaotic. And that's what makes it one of the most vital dimensions of subtle power. Because power that cannot adapt is not power, it's performance. It's conditional. It's fragile. And the world doesn't care about your carefully designed ideal conditions. The world changes. People change. Rooms shift. Dynamics evolve in the blink of an eye. And if you're only powerful when everything goes according to plan, you're not powerful, you're rehearsed. And rehearsed presence is easy to spot. It works until someone interrupts your flow. Until the meeting doesn't go the way you expected. Until the emotions in the room don't match the script you practiced. That's when most people break character. That's when their silence becomes panic, their stillness becomes hesitation, and their confidence becomes performance anxiety. Because they weren't trained to adapt. They were trained to execute a plan that only works when the world cooperates. But the ones who truly move rooms, who hold gravity without force, who command attention without speaking, they are not just clear and disciplined. They are adaptive. They are emotionally agile, mentally fluid, and energetically flexible, not weak, not passive, but deeply intelligent in their responsiveness. They don't react to pressure. They study it. They don't collapse under unpredictability. They breathe into it. They adjust their tone, shift their pace, scan the energy, realign their focus, and keep moving. Not with desperation, but with deliberate recalibration. Adaptability is how you stay effective when nothing goes the way you wanted it to. It's how you hold presence in rooms that weren't built for your voice. It's how you continue leading even when the map is unclear. It's not just a survival skill. It's a strategic advantage. Because when you adapt well, you disarm volatility. You neutralize emotional escalation. You diffuse manipulation. Not with resistance, but with awareness. You see through the shift without losing yourself to it. And that kind of presence, calm, responsive, unshaken, is more commanding than any performance of confidence could ever be. Think of Bruce Lee. Be like water, he said. Not soft. Formless. Unstoppable. Not because it resists everything, but because it adapts to anything. It moves around obstacles. It flows with gravity. It breaks down mountains not with brute force but with relentless, intelligent movement. That's adaptability. That's the kind of power that doesn't ask for attention but draws it. That's the kind of energy that doesn't shout to be heard but changes the climate simply by adjusting to it, without losing center. And that's the key. Adaptability that isn't grounded in identity becomes chaos. But adaptability anchored in purpose becomes precision. It becomes art. It becomes power so refined it doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up in how you sit through discomfort without shrinking. In how you shift your language depending on who you're speaking to, not to be manipulative, but to be understood. It shows up in how you change your route without abandoning the destination. In how you update your methods without negotiating your principles. This is why adaptability must be trained. It's not a personality trait. It's a muscle. You train it every time you feel thrown off course and choose to breathe instead of panic. Every time the plan changes and you choose to pivot instead of complain. Every time you're tempted to match someone's chaos but instead drop deeper into calm. That's training. That's power. That's leadership, silent, consistent, undeniable. And the more you train this muscle, the less you fear the unknown. Because now you don't need certainty to move forward. You don't need agreement to make decisions. You don't need the script to go your way to hold your frequency. You simply adjust. You refine. You flow. And that ability, to remain aligned in motion, is what separates amateurs from professionals, talkers from doers, performers from leaders. The greatest influence you will ever have is not in controlling your environment. It's in mastering your response to it. And adaptability is what gives your response range. Range without losing substance. Flexibility without losing form. It's what allows you to walk into any room, corporate, creative, chaotic, calm, and remain yourself, not as a fixed idea, but as a fluid, intentional presence that cannot be thrown off course because your center was never external to begin with. So remember this, adaptability isn't about being everything to everyone. It's about being fully you, with enough emotional dexterity, mental agility, and energetic sovereignty to move through change, not be defined by it. And when that becomes your default, you don't need to control the outcome. You don't need the room to behave. You don't need people to understand you right away. You move how the moment requires, and in doing so, you reveal that true power doesn't resist change. It orchestrates it. Chapter 11. Resilience as Unbreakable Presence. Resilience isn't about bouncing back. It's about not breaking. It's about learning how to absorb impact without allowing that impact to corrupt the way you see yourself or shape the way you move in the world. It's about carrying the weight of disappointment, failure, betrayal, rejection, not as a victim, not as a martyr, not as someone who collects pain as proof of effort, but as someone who metabolizes every moment into clarity, into intention, into edge. True resilience is not performance. It is not the speech you give about how hard it's been. It is not the post you make after you survive something just to prove you're still standing. True resilience is invisible to the outside world while it's happening. It is silent, painful, unglamorous work. It's the moment when you're sitting in the rubble, still bleeding, still unsure, still hurting, and you decide not to collapse into blame or self-pity, but to begin again. Quietly. Without guarantees. Without needing anyone to notice. Because power, subtle, real, long-term power, is not built by those who never fall. It is built by those who refuse to stay down. Who learn to stand with wounds still open. Who walk into rooms with scars, not hidden, but also not broadcasted for sympathy, because their identity is no longer attached to what happened to them, but to who they chose to become because of it. That's the root of unshakable presence. Not perfection. Not ease. Resilience. And here's the truth most people don't want to say out loud. Resilience isn't pretty. It's not inspirational in the moment. It's frustrating. It's slow. It's filled with self-doubt, detours, regression, and days where you question if it's even worth it. And the only reason some people make it through and others don't is not intelligence. Not luck. Not circumstance. It's willingness. The willingness to get up again. To keep moving without clarity. To take one more step even when your mind is screaming that nothing will change. And that willingness, when chosen repeatedly, becomes a kind of quiet, unstoppable authority. The kind that walks into a room and doesn't have to speak loudly because its very being says, "I've been through hell. And I didn't flinch." You feel it in people like that. You feel it in the way they speak, measured, never frantic. In the way they look at you, not to impress, but to see. In the way they pause before responding, not because they're unsure, but because they've learned to respect the weight of their words. And that restraint, that depth, that grounded presence, that's not something you can fake. That's not something you can read in a book. That's the result of earned clarity. Clarity earned by enduring what didn't go your way and choosing to become better, not bitter. Because bitterness is the easiest choice. It's a seductive path. It feels justified. But it poisons your presence. You can't carry subtle power while still carrying grudges. You can't lead with clarity while resenting the pain that built you. You can't command a room while secretly believing you were cheated by life. You either carry your past with reverence, or you let it rot your future. And resilient people choose reverence. They look back not with blame, but with understanding. Not with romanticism, but with ownership. And in that ownership is where real power is born. Because if you can own what broke you, you can also own what you're becoming. And this doesn't mean becoming hard. Resilience isn't about emotional numbness. It's not about becoming untouchable. That's not strength, that's trauma masquerading as control. No, true resilience is softness protected by steel. It's vulnerability without volatility. It's openness without being gullible. It's learning to trust again without forgetting the lesson. It's standing in your story without needing to weaponize it. That's what gives presence depth. That's what makes someone compelling even in silence. You can feel when they've been forged, not polished. And when you've been forged, you stop overreacting. You stop proving. You stop needing every interaction to go your way, because you've already survived worse. You've already been ignored, doubted, underestimated, and you moved anyway. You kept going. You kept building. And that kind of consistency under pressure becomes undeniable. You become the person people look to, not because you're the loudest, not because you're perfect, but because you're still here. Steady. Clear. And present. Resilience teaches you to move without applause. To heal without an audience. To evolve without needing anyone to notice. It teaches you how to fail without turning on yourself. How to lose without losing identity. How to rebuild without rushing to prove you're okay. And that grace, that slow, deliberate reconstruction of self, creates an energy that cannot be explained but is always respected. You don't need to announce you're strong. You don't need to talk about everything you've overcome. You walk differently. You decide faster. You carry tension without projecting it. You hold pain without performing it. You move like someone who's built trust, not with the world, but with themselves. And that kind of internal trust becomes external presence. A presence that doesn't sway with the wind. A presence that doesn't collapse under pressure. A presence that says, without a word, I bend, but I do not break. Chapter 12. Embodiment. becoming the force you once chased. There comes a moment, after the inner wars have been fought, after the identities have been peeled away, after the masks have been laid down and the noise filtered out, where you stop trying to become someone, and you start being. Not performing, not aspiring, not endlessly fixing, but embodying. You walk into a room and you don't need to be loud, because your silence is already saying more than most people's best rehearsed lines. You don't chase energy, because your frequency already attracts exactly what it's aligned with. You don't fear rejection, because your identity is not built on being received, it's built on being true. That's the final stage of subtle power. It's no longer about building the skill. It's about becoming the signal. You don't look for presence, you are presence. You don't negotiate your values, you move with them etched into every step. And people notice, not because you try to be noticed, but because the integrity of your movement is undeniable. You're not trying to influence, your existence already influences. Your restraint, your tone, your body language, your way of listening, it all becomes a transmission. You're no longer someone trying to make an impact. You're someone who is the impact, simply by showing up as fully integrated, fully aligned, fully you. And no, that version of you isn't perfect. It's not immune to fear, to doubt, to pressure. But it's clear. It's sovereign. It doesn't apologize for existing at a different rhythm. It doesn't shrink to fit into narratives that make others more comfortable. It's not desperate to explain, to prove, to validate. It moves with patience. It watches before speaking. It waits without freezing. It speaks without posturing. Because it no longer needs to be convincing. When you embody subtle power, people feel it before they understand it. And that sensation, of something grounded, non-reactive, measured, magnetic, is the most influential force in any room, any industry, any relationship. You become the gravity others orbit around, not because they have to, but because the alternative is chaos. Your consistency becomes a mirror. Your silence becomes a challenge. Your calm becomes an invitation to elevate. Not by pressure, not by manipulation, but by presence. People begin to organize themselves around you because they can sense, even if they can't articulate it, that you're not performing. You're anchored. And that anchoring gives others permission to become anchored too. But here's the hard truth. You can't fake this. You can't download it. You can't take a shortcut to embodiment. You can read all the right books, quote all the right thinkers, master all the right strategies, but if your energy isn't clean, if your daily habits don't reflect your principles, if your reactions still belong to a version of you that was controlled by fear, then your presence will always feel slightly off. Just enough to be ignored. Just enough to be dismissed. Just enough to be felt but not trusted. Embodiment doesn't come from information. It comes from integration. It's not about knowing what power looks like. It's about being congruent, so ruthlessly congruent that everything about you starts to vibrate at the same level. Your actions, your thoughts, your responses, your relationships, your environments. All of it aligned. And that alignment becomes a force multiplier. It amplifies your message without you needing to shout it. It deepens your leadership without you needing to dominate. It sharpens your decision-making without you needing to rush. Because embodiment is the ultimate efficiency, there's no wasted movement, no false humility, no energy poured into image maintenance. What you see is what you get, and what you get is solid. You see, people don't trust noise. They don't trust hype. They don't trust perfection. But they trust real. They trust presence that doesn't flinch. They trust people who say no without guilt, who speak simply but mean it, who don't need to name drop their wisdom because their being already speaks of it. And when you become that person, quietly, consistently, unapologetically, everything changes. You stop chasing opportunity. You attract it. You stop fighting to be heard. People start leaning in. You stop trying to be liked. You become respected. And not the kind of respect that comes from performance, but the kind that comes from recognition. They recognize your work, your edge, your gravity, and they adjust. And no, it's not overnight. Embodiment is earned. Through failure. Through silence. Through repetition. Through the discomfort of growth that no one celebrates because they can't see it happening. But you feel it. And over time, so will they. The tone of your voice will change. The way you sit will shift. The kind of people who try to access you will evolve. Because you've moved out of theory and into truth. You've become so aligned, so practiced, so attuned to your own integrity that your presence becomes inevitable. This is where the real power lives. Not in manipulation, not in control, not in the image, but in the embodiment. The lived experience of someone who has been through the fire, stripped of the noise, who no longer reaches for power because they are it. Still, steady, sovereign. And that kind of power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, doesn't ask to be accepted, doesn't rely on external anything, that kind of power can't be stopped. It doesn't shout. It doesn't bend. It doesn't flinch. It simply moves.